So, yeah, welcome back to another edition of AI Insiders with AI Marketers Guild, and just great to see everyone here today. We're going to have a fun conversation on media buying and much more with Abtin from Blueprint. Abtin was introduced by another very active and enthusiastic community member, Chris Perkins, and so it's just been great to see that we have speakers who are sourced because they've been involved with this community. We've got Call Me JayZ coming up in several weeks, and others recently who've been part of this, and then others who just expanding that network, and it's just I'm always looking to hear about just great thinkers and practitioners I haven't met yet, and so been having some great conversations with Abtin, and I'll make you a co-host too. Just Abtin, you won't have to do any of the actual admin for the event, so don't worry about that.
Okay.
But any kind of show and tell, fair game, and just as always, just we usually have a couple folks who are new here, but this is this is not a webinar. This is an interactive conversation, and so you are welcome to interject, to share things in the chat. There's some folks like JayZ who are especially good at hand raising. I often spend 5 minutes looking for that button and just give up, but always great when you want to come on camera and share something that way too. So enough of my spiel. Abtin, what's going on?
Not much. Thank you for inviting me to your group. I thank you for that. I appreciate that. For the folks that don't know me, my name is Abtin Buergari, and I'm the CEO of a company called Blueprint, which is an AI tech product for the ad tech world. And so I'm sure we'll talk about it, but that's what I do.
And so what's the story behind, like, how long have you
Yeah.
been working on this?
Yeah, so I'm actually a transplant into the marketing industry. My previous life, I worked in the legal industry and I built the fastest growing company in the legal industry. And our claim to fame was getting the attorneys to the relevant evidence incredibly quickly among, hundreds of millions of records at times. Um, and the big thing that we had to solve there was how to properly structure highly unstructured data. And so I did that. I sold that company private equity. We grew it again. And in 2016, I started just looking around. I was just like, you do something for a while, you just naturally start looking, what am I going to do next?
Mhm.
Right. And I started investing in e-commerce businesses in like 2017. And my challenge was trying to understand, lining them up against each other and trying to understand who has the most meaningful engagement from their customers
Mhm.
relative to what they're selling. So if you plot a course of e-commerce businesses, a product that sells at a rate higher than others that has a business model that works is a really interesting longer term investment if it's scalable and the market can absorb a lot of their product. And so that's what I was looking to do. And I couldn't find a good way of measuring their advertising amongst each other at the time. Today, I would look at a tool like Triple Whale to do some of that.
Mhm.
And that was 2017. And so the first thing I did was, wow, this is a really interesting problem. And I want to get in the middle of it.
Mhm.
So I built an agency. That agency is now run by Chris Perkins. That's the connection point about that, and really saw like how messy it is to advertise and try to understand what's going on, and then from that like have a team that draws meaningful insight and what do I do next and how do I make this better and blah 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 blah. That became a really interesting problem.
Mhm.
Once I really felt the problem, understood it, we were managing, over $100 million of ads at the agency. And I was like, okay, I want to try to solve this better. And that was like 2020, 2021. Started writing the base of the product then. It launched in 2023, and we are now scaling pretty quickly. We have probably $350 million of ads running through our platform a year now. You know, and it's this last couple months has been like, you know, so much growth that we probably have to slow down a little bit. People are complaining about responding to things and little things that, yeah, they want done. So yeah, we're feeling like we're starting to catch it, that wave.
Well, I want to ask like my like kind of like hypothesis question first, and then we'll get into more
Yeah.
about what you do and everything, and maybe go from there. Because like, as I've been seeing all of this stuff coming, right? Then you know, looking at just like the 95%, maybe 99% of advertisers who either have no idea what they're doing, yeah, or who are not advertising because they don't know how to do it and don't think they can do it well. It's like, you know, just some form of stock picking, right? Like, I don't want to just leave this to chance. So there's still, even as much as Google and Meta and Amazon expanded the pool of advertisers in the world, there's still so many who just sit on the sidelines or don't do much. And I feel like we're heading to a point where there's I love the Staples campaign, the easy button. Yeah, that we're gonna get there where it's like, here's my website or a bit of collateral, some description. There's a bit about me, a bit about what I want to prioritize: online sales, awareness. I want to actually get people into a store. I want to get people on my email list, whatever that most immediate trackable goal is. And then just, I don't like, as long as I'm not like supporting terrorists or like doing something that's like so far out there, I just do it for me, right? Like I don't want to have to think about it. You tell me, you allocate. It's like something more like the 401k than stock pick, right? Like, just like you trust that there's someone out there who's, in this case, tech, that's putting it in the right buckets, and over time should keep getting better. And then you don't have to worry so much about it, especially as long as the numbers go up into the right. Like, is this coming?
Um, Gosh, I want to respond to that maybe using a slight analogy and then like give a more clear answer.
Yeah.
I think that Tesla's Robotaxi is a very similar thing to what you're kind of saying out loud, right? Like this
Yes.
environment where cars will drive themselves. We don't have to worry about them. They're not going to get into car accidents. They're going to be highly efficient because you don't have to own one and you could just rent it when you need it. Like, you know, it is a very real possibility, is kind of the thing. But getting to that possibility is going to take time. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes we underestimate what it'll take and why, because there's complexities that are, there's a layer of complexity that I'd love to talk about, that I do think can be made much simpler. But you know, there you go. I think it's going to take time, but I do think one day it's going to be a like, here's my idea and this is my content, and go like take care of it for me. And you know, I think
So
there's
as a
something like that.
follow-on to David's question, I'd love to, get into some of the details. I was just exploring how opaque and ridiculous I come from digital advertising, and had the big, steaming pile of garbage data that I was, supposed to turn into some miracle answer of what the ads did for them. And I'm a behavioral scientist, so I'm not going to fudge the numbers. Like, that's not in my DNA, right? So where is Web3? I mean, blockchain, open ledger, Web3 all makes perfect sense to solve some of the ails, and it's not going to happen overnight. So I'd love kind of, if somewhere in your talk you can riff on that a bit, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll just do it now. I think you're on to a really interesting point. And just I think your name, I'm sorry, hold on one second. I can't see. Is it
Aileen, Aileen.
Aileen? Aileen, just to clarify for anybody that's not quite following what she's sharing, the blockchain presents a very interesting opportunity to address the privacy issue. So what we mean by that is the problem with the privacy issue is that we don't want certain bits of data transmitted and held by things like a Facebook or whatever else the case is. And something like a blockchain environment means Facebook has access to unencrypt a piece of it, but not understand what it fully means. And the blockchain would hold it and would be the only holder of that private data. It's a very interesting, elegant solution to that problem. Do I think that's going to enter the market? I don't know. I don't know people that are working on it. I'm sure somebody's thinking about it and working on it. Just, yeah, back to your
The
point.
agency, their name is escaping me. They were touting it. They were out of New Zealand, I want to say. But they backed off of it because they felt, they were out over their skis. But then you have heads of mammoth digital advertisers like Unilever, Paul Pullman, and P&G's equivalent, Mark Pritchard, saying, we need transparency, and only 30 cents of every dollar being working media because there's that many hands in the cookie jar is preposterous.
Yeah, so I want to share a couple reasons why I think I want to share a couple reasons why I think that the opportunity with securing private data on the blockchain is not going to work. So the reality is the platforms want you to not advertise on other platforms, and that is a very strong monopoly that they own together as a family. So like the Metas, the Googles, they own this environment. They don't want it to work perfectly in a lot of ways, right? So there's that working against it. Technically, though, it is a very interesting solution. And I think back to your first comment, I think what you said is this pile of garbage data that I've had to deal with, right? Yeah, I think that
I withheld from the usual profanities because I don't know you yet.
okay. Yeah, I mean, that's like when I walked into this market as an engineer, that was the thing that really caught me. Like, wow, this stuff is a joke. The way people are organizing this data and reporting to their clients is a joke. There's nothing to be done here. Why do we need to like have a quarterly business review where we're talking about a series of ads in a dashboard of data that is, 60, 90 days old? Like, it doesn't matter. Nothing we're doing in these meetings is meaningful, is the way that I looked at it. And that's like what really got me interested, right? Like, we need to know this stuff. We need to know what to do today about what happened in the last day, 2 days across the entire spend that we're dealing with. That was fundamentally what I was paying attention to. And I think where our product is interesting, where our technology is interesting, and I still think
doing your real-time optimizations.
Yes, we provide forward-look real-time optimizations based on your behavior of your ad sets and your ads against a primary goal that is tracked with any event trigger. So it could be a GA event trigger, it could be a HubSpot event trigger, it could be anything, right? So that is really where we went to, is like, how do we do that? We need to provide people clarity on where they should move their money. So we refer to that as efficiency, how to spend better. And number two, productivity. What kinds of ads should I be creating more of and why? Those are the two fundamental questions from insights that we're seeking to answer for people. But yeah, I mean, you bring up all sorts of interesting questions about like data loss and so on and so forth. Bottom line that I found, and another comment that that David made early on, is like 95% of advertisers are a joke. I'm going to share with you guys some info as an outsider, now more of an insider. I'll tell you, I'm very underimpressed with the environments a lot of the agencies and use to understand and manage data. And I don't mean that as any sort of offensive comment to anyone here that's in that ecosystem.
I come from that, and that's why I'm not there anymore. It's horrendous.
It's so, like, I find that the brands that have really tried to take control of their numbers and their data are actually far superior in ability to manage these questions than are their agencies that they're spending money with. And it's interesting, some of them have this great data environment in place and they still are hiring agencies to buy the ads and stuff like that. So I'm seeing that. I'm also seeing a lot of people that are going from like an agency model into an in-house model with a tight media team that's very good at the job. I'm seeing that with technology like ours. These are all real things that I've started to see happening. Yeah, but I think it goes back to like a great marketing team recognizes that there is data loss, number one. So they're going to tie to a model that makes sense to their executive team. So if I'm selling shoes, my executive team looks at Shopify and that's their source of truth because that's the number of units I've sold. If I'm a B2B business and I live and die on my, number of subscriptions I'm selling, I'm probably using a tool like HubSpot to see like the entire funnel of like where my subscriptions happening, how many do I have, what's LTV look like, right? This is where the executive team lives. And I think part of the challenge with advertising is it's trying to live somewhere else. And I think that if you have 100 conversions a day in HubSpot, you need to know exactly what ads are creating those or proportionally creating those. And there's plenty of usable technology out there to get to a really solid answer that's about 85% accurate, which is about 1,000,000% better than whatever you guys are trying to conjure with 75 partially implemented pieces of technology on top of each other. Like that's the sort of stuff that I'm seeing right now. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll give you a great example. Yes.
The really sophisticated companies are bringing a lot in-house. So Disney is bringing it in-house. Some of the companies I mentioned previously bringing things in-house.
Yeah, yeah. So Dish
Not
Network,
necessarily the creative, but the media and some of the marketing operations.
yeah, yes. And I think David asked the question of, is there ever going to be an easy button? Here's the thing that I think is where we're headed. I think that the hardest part of this will be, and it should be, and if it's not, you got to really question yourself. But the hardest part of this is going to actually be what's my strategy, what's my content, what's my audience. Those are the real questions that we need to answer as humans. Like we need to be answering those questions. And then we need to have machinery that does all the crunching and telling us what happened based on our strategy. So if and this is, and I guess like back to kind of the chat GPT universe, how often are you asking it a highly complex strategic question that it has the right answer to with very little meaningful input? Like a website is not going to tell you what your content should say to your audience because your website could be wrong about your content to your audience. So like there's a lot of that. I think what's going to happen is the easy button is going to be the machinery in the background. People will continue to buy ads on platforms. One day, maybe there's a central repository very similar to the auction system that exists for display advertising. Maybe there's something like that for the rest of the digital ecosystem in some way, shape, or form. I think people will buy the ads, but I think the easy button, there's a stopping point with the easy button around like, what's our strategy with this specific audience? What are we saying to them and why are we saying that? I think that's going to be a harder solve because you don't want to get it wrong and spend $1 million on that. Like you just don't. And, I don't know. As I say that out loud, I hate the fact that maybe I'm like, maybe the creativity is also disappearing out of the hands of the humans, but I don't think it is quite yet. Maybe that's why I'll leave it.
So one of our colleagues from a different group, Harrison, referred to it as niching down. So the people who are doing the SEO and paying the ads, they have no incentive. The agency doesn't even do organic. So they're not organically optimizing their site, nor is the agency telling them they need to do that, even though it's a different team at the agency that manages the website.
Sure.
So they're not really helping the client as best they should. And that's where,
Yeah.
it's a bit dubious.
Yeah, the best teams that I interact with on the advertising world are actually super small in comparison to the amount they're advertising. I'm just giving you guys some facts from my like current interactions. they're pretty small relative to their advertising. We have a client that has 12 employees internally, manages $140 million a year in ad spend. Okay. Yep. And they're amazing at it. They know every ad exactly what it did. They know every influencer and the value of that influencer down to a minute yesterday, right? They're really, really good, and they're small. And the reason is they're thinking forward. They're not, they actually, you know how everybody hates GA4, they base a lot of their optimization suggestions on the platform of GA4's data-driven model, which like you think, oh my God, GA4, that's such a crappy product. Actually, if you use any of these products to their like extent, like HubSpot has an incredibly deep tracking system for its ads. If you use it correctly and you connect that to an optimization engine, all of a sudden your environment is going to go through the roof. But you got to really be tuned into the tech side. And I think the challenge with outsourcing the tech side of this is it's just like anything else. Would you really outsource the development of your product to some group of people that who knows if they're going to do a great job or not? Like you're hoping and wishing, right?
And if you're having the agency do the analytics on their media spend that they get a percentage of, you're letting the elephant watch the peanuts.
That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. I
So-
get lost in the data stuff. So,
so then can you also explain, because like you talked about the importance of getting the strategy right and some messaging right, with where you're coming from and what you've built and more broadly in the like AI powered media buying space. And I think it would be interesting to know more of like what to look for when trying to tap into the latest offerings now, and like what does the latest generation of AI powered technology do that like say a year or two ago it didn't or couldn't do?
okay. The stuff that's coming across, I'll tell you what I'm seeing in the market, and then I'll tell you what we do, which are two different things. I just want to be clear about that. The things that I'm seeing come across my desk that are really interesting to me right now is a company recently I saw, they take all your video ads direct from the platform. So like they connect to Facebook, take your video file from Facebook. They know all the statistical data around engagement related to that media, to that piece of media. They run the media through their LLM to understand characteristics of what's going on in the video, who's talking, what's being said, content, name it. They're dragging all of that data out of the video. And they're relating it to everything else you have in market. And they're trying to give you ideas of like what more you should do, like what other content you should include in your video, right? That's pretty cool. That's really interesting and relevant, right? Because like the better video you create for your audiences, the more engagement you have. That leads naturally to more conversions and so on and so forth, right? So that is stuff I'm seeing in the market. They're not the only ones. There's a couple of pieces of tech that are really focused around that. One of them that grew pretty quick is called Darwin. I would say that's a point solution, to be really frank and honest. Like I look at that as a point solution. Like, okay, you connected my content to LLM and it's grabbing characteristics and you're kind of telling me what characteristics are important. You know, anybody, including Facebook, is going to do that pretty soon if they're not already doing it. So I think a lot of the like front edge stuff is some of that stuff, and it's going to feed you, okay, write this kind of content, build these kind of videos, blah, 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 right? I think that's all good. What ours does is it measures your content at the rate at which it starts to fatigue. It starts to alert your content's fatiguing, and what content is the opposite. It's creating the reverse trend. It's really starting to take off. So we call those we call those two levers all about productivity, right? We want to reduce stagnating and dying ads and creatives, and we want to put more emphasis around the ones that are doing really well. The second part of what our tech does is it takes the ones that are doing really well, it sends those to LLM, it gathers what we call AI tags or characteristics, same concept, and it brings them back to our engine. We have not yet like put those in a UI back to the user to go, this is what you should do about it, because we're still playing with that. Because, you know, the data is also very randomized sometimes around that. Like these, you know, the headline and the content and the, like this headline, this content, and this video work really well here, but they work terribly over here. So there's there's more work to be done. There's more work on the modeling side before we release that. That's kind of what we're doing about it. I see a lot of activity on that side, like taking the content, shoving it to LLM, trying to make sense of it and get, back informationally, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? I think the piece that's disconnected from that is you're relying on the platform data to tell you that. So if I rely on Facebook to tell me that my ads are getting a lot of engagement, there's a lot more to the puzzle than just how much engagement are my ads getting. If my engagements are getting very high levels, if my ads are getting very high levels of engagement at the top of the funnel, but they're terrible at the bottom of the funnel, like we got to think about that differently from one another and like kind of dissect that. So I think those two worlds of like, what does my executive team see from a result standpoint? Where are the monetary and ad level efficiency opportunities? I think those two questions need to be connected to the content question of like, what should I have in market? And I think those two worlds need to live together. And I imagine, back to your question about the easy button, that's where we're probably getting a little closer to the easy button.
Yeah, great.
Can
I'm
I
gonna go to
can I
Karen,
just-
please. Yeah.
I'd love to just dig in a little bit more about what you just said about being able to say when content is fatiguing, because in my experience, clients tend to think that their ads are perfectly fine. Like, I think the old-fashioned way of looking at it, like to your point, Aileen, about, just a wealth of garbage data that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They tend to keep older creative in market that they're putting really valuable media dollars against for way too long. And I would love to understand how your platform looks at it differently to convince them that, no, you just can't set it and forget it. That's not what digital is all about. It's about constantly refreshing and making, optimizing based on what's working and what's not. I would just love you to dig into that piece a little bit more, because I am seeing that clients are putting way more emphasis on their paid creative, as they should, right? Because they're putting boatloads of media dollars against it. But B, they're not necessarily respecting the interaction between organic and paid, and how important it is to constantly be putting fresh content out there to engage their community and build community. But on the paid piece in particular, I'm seeing the opposite of what you're saying. So
yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to pull up I was just thinking, like, can I pull up a client and show you? Because I think bottom line, just to like cut, like the thing that you shared at the very top of this was that like people don't recognize that their content, their ads are fatiguing. They don't do that soon enough. And it's an exponential problem. Like if my content's fatiguing on Monday and I'm finding out on Friday, it's exponentially fatigued, right? And I've exponentially spent too much on it, right? So yeah, I'll say there's a human element to that I've identified recently that I didn't even realize at first. It's that people are connected to their content. So what's happening with really good measurement is like measurement doesn't care about what you think about your content at all, right? So if you think this idea you had, for example, a man on the street with a camera and he's taking some video and blah, 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 and it worked for you great in January and you were crushing it, and you just left them on and it's working great and it starts to slow down and so on and so forth. Someone back there had that idea, especially, some creative person had that idea, and they have a really hard time realizing that their idea is done. Like, we're done with the man on the street idea. We're moving on. So I think there's a human element.
Or at minimum, there just needs to be another chapter, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Let's try. Maybe the idea is still valid, but now you just need to kind of build on it.
Well, and to build on Karen's great question, what do you do for channel optimization, right? Because it's the creative assets, it's also what channels are working well for you and optimizing across channels, because a lot of time each channel is its own echo chamber.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna give a slightly technical answer to the first question, and then I'll come back to this channel question that you just mentioned. So the technical answer to the first question is machine learning models will tell you when your content is fatiguing, period. Like, We don't have to like debate them. It's just a fact. So what do I mean by that? Actually, I'd love, Karen, for me to ask you your definition of fatigue, and then I'll share with you my definition, see how close we are. So can you share with us, like, when you say content is fatigued, like share with us like your meaning behind that?
My meaning is just very simply that people just start glossing over it because they've seen it so many times. It's like, oh my God, not that again. Like I'm gonna actually start being mad at this brand because they're boring me with the same stuff. Like the effectiveness starts to dwindle so much so that it becomes just wallpaper. And I think
Yeah.
that like the whole meta model of pay to play that obviously has been around for a really, really long time just reinforces that just hit people over the head with the same thing over and over and over again, and eventually they'll succumb. I don't think that's true with humans. Humans are more creative than that, and humans expect a lot more than that just to be hit over the head with the same exact thing. So I'm not saying that it necessarily means that the idea is fatigued, but that execution gets fatigued because it doesn't work harder when the frequency is like God knows how much, 100x.
4, 5, 6, whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my definition, but what's yours?
Yeah. So my definition is simply that the rate of engagement on the content, on the creative, and actually it's called an ad variation in that scenario. The engagement with that ad variation has gone down recently at a rate which is more rapid than the previous 7 or 14 days out. So like the math model on that is if a piece of content is losing engagement at a rate faster than that which it was losing in the past, it is now falling off a cliff.
Yep.
And to me, that's the moment of fatigue. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think yours is the more mathematical version of what I said, but I meant that too. Like, yeah, engagement. If you're not getting the engagement, then it means that people are just glossing over it, right?
Exactly. And so back to your point, this is the point of our technology is we pull this to the front. And I'm just going to pull up an example of this because I just logged in one of our clients' things and I'm sure they don't care. This is an example of what we just talked about. So when the rate of engagement starts to cliff dive like this, we flag these ads for them so that they immediately know, like, this is areas where you need to make big improvement. And we also do it in the reverse, which is about the rate of, notice this might be a higher click, but the rate of click is growing in the most recent past. That is the indicator that this creative could be really interesting. And so this goes into how we provide our users enhancements monetarily or around the ad set about like what creatives to put more emphasis on, right? This is the sort of stuff that we're answering for our users. So yeah, and this is not like us just doing a big demo. I just wanted to show you guys, like, when you're thinking about this stuff, it's out there, the engines are out there. It's just a matter of connecting the dots. And I think what I'm finding is, so it's a human element. They have to let go of their strategy, their idea, or enhance it, as you said, Karen. But really, we have to agree that when we get to this point, it's time to make a change, right? The second question was about how content is different per platform, 100% different. Our technology tracks a single creative across platforms. So if I have like a video that I have on Instagram and it's very similar to the video on TikTok, our tech will show you the analytics related to both of them next to each other so you can understand the video holistically, right? And we thought this was like brilliant at the time when we built it. We're like, oh, this is so important and this and that. It's important, but there is some subtlety to it. Video on TikTok may not play like video on Instagram. It's just different. They're a little different than one another. How do you know? You just go back to the modeling. If that ad set's performance is a certain way, we know the characteristics of the targets in that ad set. The way I targeted an audience on TikTok in that ad set where my video is performing exceptionally well needs to be clear to me so that I can take that learning and either make an adjustment in Facebook to my target or recognize this is something in this target range on TikTok that performs really well. Let me make more of those. Let me just create more of this for TikTok, try them on, Facebook. And we try to give people a little bit of that. Let me see if I have an example of that. We refer to this as top creatives, which is top creatives is this idea of like mathematically, these creatives are your greatest creatives in general. And here's where they live and what platforms they live on and where else you should consider putting them. And right now, all of them, unfortunately, this example, I don't want to waste any time. So in that example, they're all on
That's
the
a perfect example of if something's doing really well and it's kind of an island, that's a great way of, getting distributed content across platforms and see if you have, similar results.
Yeah.
And of course, the platforms are not the same. So it's not one size fits all content.
Yeah. And but you're onto that. Like, it's like, okay, this is doing really well on TikTok. I should try it on Instagram, but I need to know that video's performance comparing the two. I need to know TikTok versus Instagram because that's a learning for me. The way I target on Instagram might be different, and that's a learning for me. And these are all the things that your media teams, in my opinion, need to be focused on instead of trying to draw together some like conglomerate report of garbage that doesn't mean anything. They need to be focused on this front edge. We have this content out. What's going on? Okay, let's move some of this content here. Oh, wow, look at this influencer's performance. Even though we pay them 20 grand to make content a month, their conversion rates are really low. Their cost per conversion is really low. So let's juice that more. These are the questions that people really need answers to, and that's where we're focused. Yeah.
And I think too, like AI is a perfect use case for AI is to do exactly what you were saying in terms of, okay, we know this idea resonates across platforms, but this format, this length, this wherever the CTA is, works better on TikTok versus Instagram. And then AI can then create the different versions for the different platforms without just making it mind-numbing for the poor creatives to be creating like millions and millions of different versions that are going to work harder on the different platforms. And I think that's something that's really interesting, where your machine learning can identify that, okay, what we've learned is this is a solid idea, solid concept, but on TikTok it needs to be this way and this length and this format. On Instagram, on Facebook, on X, wherever you're placing it, it just needs to have nuances. So that I think you hit something really interesting there.
Yeah, I think that's when my utopic state of media, if I were to just kind of say it out loud, my utopic state of media would be that the creative teams are focused on idea generation and however quickly they can generate the first iteration of creative that get into market, and the engine is telling you what other creative is working, and you have AI like LLM based tools, large language models that are creating variations of those rapidly for the ones that are working and distributing them to the place, and the engine is distributing them to the places that it needs to. Like, that to me is like so highly efficient that beyond that, what else do I really want from my media space, right? Like, what else do I need? I really need more creatives. So I spend my energy, my money with agencies that are excellent at that, right? I'm grabbing that. I'm using a machine to determine the rest of it for me. And it's also creating variations for me. So like, what's my real outlying cost? It's really to the media itself. And I'm managing the media. I'm not letting Facebook make my decisions for me, right? Like, I think that state is a really great state to get to. Yeah.
Can you dig in a little bit more on your thoughts about the large language models? I read something recently about the new KPI being your share of the large language models, and that so often they're impacted by things not that marketers aren't even aware are out there in the universe, and affecting share of voice and affecting conversation sentiment analysis and whatnot that aren't even part of their paid ads. I would love to understand your thoughts on that and how your platform helps with that.
Our platform does not help with that basically at all. I don't really think. And I would share with you that my base knowledge of how AI is affecting share of voice is very, very minimal. I can give you some thoughts around it that I have. Man, the biggest one being the more content you have it produce into your website for you, the better it sees your stuff over time as well. There's a bias that it creates on its own. Okay. There's a lot of that stuff going on in the AI space related to share of voice. That to me is really interesting. Like you were sharing, like the organic side is almost, it's just not even, yeah, the organic side could become like just a content mill. And the more it becomes like that, the more the AI engines care, right? Like the content mill is their own language. So I don't know. Like that's the extent of like really.
And I do want to make sure we get to Amit and JayZ. But I appreciate actually this call makes me want to have guest moderators and moderators too, because Karen Alien is fantastic. So appreciate you asking better questions than I would. Amit, please. Yeah.
How about now? All right, that's better. Thanks for this conversation. It's really interesting to hear all these perspectives, and it certainly fuels a lot of food for thought. I think you started to just touch on this. I was going to bring up the point of reinforced bias when we use any kind of mechanisms to favor creatives over others. It's just for my own past, that's been a very watchful moment. See, you spend a lot on creative, especially video. It takes a lot to make it, and then to make a certain decision on its performance and how to spend exponential more dollars on promoting it becomes a very tricky business, and can go very south very fast. So, I think that's one thing, I guess, just to reframe it. There's an intrinsic or inherent risk of creating a bias through data-driven analysis. There's a lot of additional factors, I guess, from a blueprint perspective, to kind of bring it back to you. What are the different dimensions that you're looking at? Obviously the rudimentary ROI measurements of the past are a bit too simplistic to really make smart decisions in terms of optimizing media across different platforms, different demographics, different creative, right? There's a multitude of inputs there. What have you found works the best and is the most consistent in making analysis decisions? Maybe just generalized, or pick a platform that you like and go from there.
Yeah. Actually, the answer that the path that we chose is somewhat generalized on purpose, because back to what you said, there is a lot going on when you write a model like that. There's a lot going on. There's bias issues. There's so many issues, right? So the first thing is to recognize that the ad platforms are the best at targeting the audiences, period. And let's stop trying to resolve that question. Like there's a lot of tech I see out there trying to create a better audience based on some stuff. And the fact of the matter is, if you set up the conversion API for Facebook, there's no one better than Facebook at figuring out who other audiences that look like that in their ASC, which is their advanced setup. Like they have this mechanism where they basically blank out your targeting ability. You can't see the targeting. You can only set very basic parameters. They do everything else. And if you have the conversion API connected, it's really powerful. It's not the pixel. It's a much more powerful mechanism for transmitting data to their server. So long story short, first thing is stop saying that there's a problem with the platforms and their targeting and they're just stealing all our money. Like first, they've created some of the most powerful algorithms out there in the world around targeting. We should use them to their nth degree. The challenge is the ability to distribute money between them. That's the fundamental challenge. Like, how do I distribute the money between them? And that's number one. And number two, related to that, is how do I distribute the money among my funnel properly? So how do I do the top of funnel, the middle of funnel, the bottom of funnel better overall to get the best result at the bottom of the funnel, right? That is really the two questions that I think people should be asking. And the way that we do it is we analyze the ad sets. So we're analyzing as much data, one, that Facebook gives us about the ad sets, which is always changing. And I'm saying Facebook, I'm just picking on them. Everyone's platform gives us something similar to an ad set, an ad group. Some of them call it a campaign, whatever. It doesn't matter. They're all basically the following ingredients. What's my objective with these ads? What's my target look like? What are the creatives that I'm going to be using? And what are the channels I'm displaying on? Those 4 questions are fundamentally the makeup of any ad set. So when we get that data and we can analyze it against other platforms, we can provide generalized directional statistical modeling, very similar to MMM. A lot of you guys know MMM, marketing mix modeling, simply ignores all the data points under the surface other than the number of purchases and the spend, and it creates exactly the same idea. The difference being MMM is using very high level data, which is actually problematic for modeling. Whereas our modeling is doing very bottom up data. It's doing it at the ad level first, ad set level next, every ad variation. And it's looking at the performance of the Facebook pixel, comparing it to the performance of whatever your end state attribution is. So if it's like a GA4, it's looking at GA4's attributions, combining them in a sense, and saying, this is what I think is actually going on. So it's a different approach to statistical modeling. And then, so when you ask me about like, we generalize it, we say, okay, we think this much money from this ad set should be redistributed. Here's why. It's plateaued. We're not getting the blah, 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 blah. You should move it to this other ad set or these 2 ad sets or whatever its kind of response is on this stuff. What does that mean? That means that directionally, we're probably right. Directionally, we're probably right. Now, can we predict within a 5% accuracy? No, we cannot yet. But I think we can get there. And I think you get there by continuing to make the data more dense. The denser the data becomes, the more variables the machine learning model can use to accurately predict. And once it has enough dimensions and knows how to weigh those dimensions, it will be able to give you predictive modeling. There is not a predictive model out there that I've seen that's meaningful, other than, the stuff Facebook has behind the curtain on its own, right? Yeah. So that was a lot of stuff I just threw out there, but I wonder if it helped answer the question.
It does. I mean, I think to some degree, it also presumes that the starting point is rational in terms of setting up your ad groups, your creatives, and all that stuff, right? Like, you're presuming that your client, person using your platform, has a good starting point. And if they do not have a good starting point, the optimizations should probably be very iterative for you to get there. But I guess one fastball, if I could, before I get off the mic, on average, what % improvement in returns has your platform provided your clients?
Yeah. Great. What a great question. It's not a fastball. When I share it, it might shock you. And, so the last time this happened was last week. A client of ours, they connected to our environment and started the pilot version. And they decreased their cost. Their top of funnel is about engagement. Their model's a little different. They're looking not just clicks, but engagement at top of funnel. And so we were measuring that, and we basically within a 2-day window gave them about a 30% change in their engagement at that part of their funnel, which is shocking. Like, you'd think, well, that's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, they took their cost per engagement from like $3.50 down to like, I think it got below $2, and it kind of came up a little bit. It's like floating, and they're working on it because it's telling them like, look, this ad set over here is your winner. Like, you need to put this much more in it. And this one that's brand new that we can see, it tells them how they're targeting it. So it's highly targeted, is not a good ad set, period. Like, it's just not doing what it's supposed to. You got to redistribute that budget. And they did, and boom, right? They're starting to get, and it's not 1 or 2, it's like 4 or 5 ad set changes that they made, monetary ad set changes they made. So that's an example. Our biggest client like added something like $200 million of top line revenue. I mean, it's crazy what it did for them. It's very doable and very possible. It's sometimes hard for people to believe. I get a lot of that. I really do. I get like, it's so hard to set up. It's not. It could be our product's easy and blah blah blah, but we're proud of it. And I wonder if that answered. Yeah.
Well,
it does. I often look at it.
I do just want to make sure, just before we get to the end, JayZ gets a chance, share her question or thought.
Sure, for sure.
Sorry, I
Hi.
could go on for another 30 minutes, but I'll get off.
I know, it was fun to geek out on, so.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the shout out. And I think Virginia's here. She's the one that introduced me to this group initially. So thank you so much. Abtin, so I've worked on multi-arm bandit models where it's changing the creative and changing the target audience for you for fintech,
Okay.
like internal proprietary models. So I'm just curious, in the ad tech world, are there these MABs like making those 4 changes for you, and does that work?
Great question. So I'm going to share it back as it relates to kind of the advertising like spin, see if I get it right. Basically, JayZ's question is, when it sees these things, there in other areas, the adjustments are automatically made, right? Like adjust the budget here, adjust this creative here, all the sort of efficiency gains. And the system does it for you automatically. The answer is there is technology out there that does that. An example of it is metadata.io. It's for B2B companies. It does a lot of like Facebook ID matching based stuff, right? I think that's we started out that way. And it was a crash and burn for us. Like it was a bad idea. Like, no. and it was a bad idea because if we miss something, or our tech team doesn't do something right, or like there's a bit of data that's like messed up, we didn't receive it correct, I mean, whatever, anything down that pipeline, and we might create a massive problem for a client. And ours wasn't massive, but it was like an overspend by like $10,000 in a given day, and that's still a big deal, right? And we just totally put a kibosh on it. We're like, this is a bad idea, right? Like, educate the media operator, let them make the decision, because they might know something we don't know. They might have turned that ad set off because their boss was like, I need $1,000 out of the budget right now. I don't care where it comes from. Like, there's a lot of other variability out there that's random. So I know it's out there. I just don't believe in it myself. It's kind of the message. Yeah.
Well,
I don't
Well,
know.
and then the AI is not training the human.
What this is amazing. I mean, just so much this discussion I love just getting into, and hearing more, just given how much you're processing and seeing out there. So Abtin, thank you so much for sharing what you're seeing out there. Again, we got a lot of great speakers coming up. I mean, we're almost all booked through the end of the year with our Wednesday calls and adding a couple of special events on top of it. So look forward to seeing you all for more of these. Send Abtin's LinkedIn before, but happy to connect anyone with him. Thanks again for Chris Perkins for the intro, Karen and Aileen for guest moderating, and just great to see everyone here. Just always a highlight of my week, and I will see you next week. We even have a special edition on Monday, and all kinds of things coming. So Abtin, thanks so much for this. Hope you come back sometime. Just keep sharing what you're seeing.
Absolutely. And thank you all for having me, and great questions. And please don't hesitate to ask more deep, whatever questions you'd like. I'm here, I'm available, and this is what I do. So
Amazing.
Thank you.
all right. Thank you.